right, well, it's 4 o'clock, and we're gonna go ahead and call this, Facilities Committee, meeting to order on January the 20th of 2021. Are there any public comments?
No, sir.
There are no public comments, so we'll get started on our agenda. And the first, thing that we're gonna talk about is we've been doing some work on a policy, update, putting a policy together for naming facilities.
Yes, sir. So we got Mike Morgan here. He's going to lead us through this discussion. Mike's done outstanding work in getting this going. This was initially brought up in the early fall about possibly naming some facilities in our school district. And we took a look at the policy. We took it to the policy committee. And Mike's been working really hard, taking a look at what other districts have done so that we have a good system in place as we continue to grow and we continue to have opportunities to recognize great things done in our community through our facility naming. So I'm going to kick it over to Mike and let him take it away.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to kind of working through some scenarios with you guys tonight, because the policy committee will have a part in actually helping us adopt the policy, but the facilities committee, if y'all had a chance to read through it, is going to play a big part in the actual renaming process by the policy that we're proposing. So we're still in a draft version right now, so if there are things that as we kind of work through this together, if there are things that jump out or things that you have questions about, then tonight's a great opportunity to discuss them. What we would like to do is take the 2 rounds of feedback we've gotten from the policy committee, the feedback we get from you guys, and then come up with a final draft version to bring to a first reading to our policy committee next month. So that's kind of where we're at with the process right now. The CW local that was adopted, the prior version was adopted in 1983, and really all it addressed is that we would have a plaque if we had a new construction, and we would have a dedication ceremony, and that was really all that it addressed. So it didn't go through any type of process that a district would go through when either naming new or renaming existing facilities. So if you could look at page 1 of the policy of the draft, which would be page 2 in our packet. Really the first 2 sections, no need probably to read through. The guidelines is basically just that saying that the board is adopting this policy to govern the process of renaming or naming district facilities. The definitions are simply 5 different criteria for what can be renamed. So it talks school buildings, rooms within a school, structures related to a school building, athletic fields and facilities, or, and I think this number 5 is kind of a catch-all, any other buildings or adjacent land area that is property of the district or board. So that kind of gives the, throughout the nomination process, and as we see kind of how this process stacks up, it really gives us the authority. Anything that the district owns, we would have the ability to name if we chose to do so. The criteria is what can a facility be named for. So when you look through that, point 1 kind of talks in broadest terms, an individual, a group, an organization, a landmark or neighborhood, or any other reason determined by the board. So you could actually, we're not going to set a specific scope that, so we could do a geographic location, a street name, a neighborhood name, a person's name, a group's name, historical name, like Chisholm Trail. So there's any type of different way that this wants to go. We'll have the latitude to do that. The only conditions to that would be the name must not already be in use by another district, school, or facility. So we wouldn't want to rename duplicate names. That kind of goes without saying. And then on point 3, it just kind of goes through some of the considerations that we would want to consider. If this is straight from 3A, is straight from some other districts' policies. I saw it pretty consistently, so I'm assuming there's been some lessons learned, especially on if you're going to name a facility for an individual who may be deceased. Most of the times it seems like it's recommended to wait a time prior. I think that maybe would limit making decisions out of on an emotional basis sometimes, and really vetting that through. So they're saying that our policy would say that a facility could be named for a living individual or a deceased individual, if the deceased individual would need to have been deceased for at least 12 months prior to submission. However, the board could consider naming a facility at any time for an individual who served in the military and died in the line of duty. That was an exception I saw in 3 or 4 different policies. So I'm assuming that was probably a recommended, that a lot of districts adopted as a recommended, since it was worded the same in several different districts' policies.
So if I can jump in real quick on that one.
Sure.
One of the things that we're trying to do with this is to create a thoughtful process for you all as a board so that you get to make the decisions on naming. And what we've seen a few times in other districts that I've worked in is that the naming of facilities is a very emotional topic. And especially if you have a student who is deceased during the school year, you might have a large group of people who want to rename or name an existing facility after that student right off the bat. Same with a community member and stuff. And so by putting a process in place to allow us to work through it and allow you all to get the right nominations in front of you as a facilities committee and in front of our entire board is really what we're hoping for in all of this. The other piece that I would say on that is we also want to prevent really poor, really challenging situations for our board. If names come forward to a board, and I'll give you a specific example, I've been in a previous district, a naming process was going on, and a person's name was given as a potential name for a school, and it was voted down by the board of trustees. Becomes a very emotional topic as well, because the board then is rejecting a nomination that went forward. And so what we want to do is create the ability to have a process that gives you a good recommendation as a facilities committee, and then when it gets to the final board for a vote, we've gone through enough of a vetting process that you shouldn't feel like you have to vote something down if you're all on the same page. Does that make sense to y'all?
Mm-hmm.
Because it puts the board against the community. If you get to that point and you're voting down a nomination that has a lot of community support, it puts you in a really awkward spot. So this policy hopefully is gonna allow us to have the right process in place to give you good options for naming your facilities.
And point B kind of alludes to that too. It says that the individual, group, or organization must embody exemplary qualities. So I mean, we think we've created a process where a nomination would not be taken to the board for action unless it's been vetted, that it does embody the community, what our school district stands for. And then the individual group must have made a significant contribution, which could include, and I think we need to include this in here, we don't want to look at this in terms of naming facilities after financial donors, but if we did choose to do that, it's best that it go ahead and be included in policy that it could be named after someone who made a financial donation to the district, local, community, state, or nation to have a connection. So you do see a little bit of that in Texas now, and primarily and sometimes in athletic facilities where they do open up some of the naming to an endorsement or a donor type deal. So I'm not saying we would move in that direction, but it's better to have it in policy if we choose to go that way than to have to go back and rewrite policy to make that exception if we choose to later.
I mean, I guess we did that back in the 90s when the Potts Swim Center was named, because they gave the first, was it $100,000 towards the facility?
Yeah.
So that was already kind of set in place
Yeah.
in Belton. And
Yeah, I
then,
hadn't even thought about that.
based on the other things that you're talking about, the way I envision this is, I know there's historical people out there that get things named after them all the time, but have nothing to do with Belton ISD. So I always envision this as being something where we honored somebody
Yeah.
from our local community that had something to do with VISD. That's kind of always been my assumption, that that would be the criteria, the number one. So,
I like that.
Yes.
not just a historical figure that had nothing to do with Belton or Belton ISD.
Right.
So, it's good to have that outline in there.
Nominations, so we've created, we think, a very clear channel on how nominations would go. So, basically, the first paragraph is just saying that when someone makes a nomination, they'll use the nomination form, and then if they want to include additional artifacts to justify this nomination, they could, newspaper articles, clippings, other types of letters of recommendation, any type of input from others in the community, those sorts of things. But once if someone wants to make a nomination, so if someone approaches a board member or a school administrator and says, hey, I would like to rename this facility after such and such, then that person will be told that there's a nomination process, there's a nomination form, We will have that. We haven't talked through all the logistics, but I probably will have a contact person. I would likely in communications where they can get that form, fill it out, submit it, and at that point, then the board facilities committee and the superintendent would review that nomination and determine if further consideration is warranted. Like Matt said earlier, what we don't want to do is create a situation that could cause a rift between our committee or our board and the community, or embarrass someone. So let's just say that we wanted to be in here that we can vet nominations and decide if it's warranted to move forward with that nomination. So if, let's just say, use me as an example. So let's, if I came back and said I wanted to name Tiger Field after my son, because he played 1 year of football there, then that would, I could get the nomination for him, I could fill it out and turn it in. That wouldn't mean that that's automatically gonna show up as an action item before the board. That's gonna be vetted with a conversation between the administrators and the facilities committee. If we deem that that is something that we would wanna consider, then we would bring it to the facilities committee and we'd kind of go through the process I'm fixing to outline. So if further consideration, if a nomination is to proceed, then the board facilities committee and superintendent will then determine if a nomination to name or rename a facility shall move forward either through the board facilities committee or if there is a need to create a school name selection committee. So here's where we kind of get to the process. So a nomination's made, the decision through talks, the decision has been made that we will want to move this nomination forward for consideration by the board. Then a decision's gonna have to be made. Is this a nomination or is this gonna do we need to get a committee together? So the way it really kind of makes sense to me, and it's when we go through the recommendation process, if it's a brand new school, we know already, we're gonna have to go through a nomination process for that. We're gonna create a committee, the committee's gonna come back with recommendations, the board will consider those recommendations, and then we'll take action on one or none of the names, and eventually we'll get to the name of the facility. But if it's a circumstance where it's an athletic facility, let's say it's a set of tennis courts, and we're gonna walk through a couple of scenarios at the end, but let's say it's a set of tennis courts and a nomination has been made to name those tennis courts in honor of one particular person, maybe a distinguished alumnus that went on to a great career, or a state champion, or a longtime coach that had a big impact on the community. That may not warrant a 12 to 20 person nominating committee to discuss that. That may be vetted, it meets the criteria, seems like a reasonable thing to do, seems like something that would honor that person as well as honor the district, and we might move that through the facilities committee onto the board as an action item. So is everybody with me so far? So if the nomination, so we're gonna make a decision. Is it, the first decision is, will we move forward or proceed with this nomination? The second decision that will need to be made is, will the facilities committee make a recommendation to the board to look at as an action item, or will we just determine that the need to create a school facilities naming committee?
Well, let me ask this real quick. I know we named High Point, Charter, and Lake Belton High School through the board. And I guess I'm curious, because I don't want to create a board to create a board or a committee. Is there a special reason that, I guess, try to figure out why we would, if we've already got a board and we have parameters, we have the facilities here, and then we have the full school board, the school name selection committee. What would be our reason for forming that?
And to generate your stakeholder input, to give you guys options to choose.
Okay.
So it would just basically be a middle tier, to me, and a middle tier between, we know we're gonna have this new campus, we know the board's gonna make a decision, how do we gather the necessary stakeholder input to make sure that the community has had an opportunity to provide options that the board can consider?
But isn't and I'm just asking, that process should be taken care of in the nominating phase though, right? If we're gonna open a new campus, we have to put it out there to community, hey, if you have an idea for the name, isn't that part of the procedure then?
And
And
under this, that's what the
That's what they
committee
would do. So
Okay.
basically, they would gather input, and that's what
Yeah.
Mike's saying, he's just formalizing that process, saying, if we got a new facility, we'd have a committee that would gather names, we'd take input from the committee would kind of vet names and then move them on to the board from that point.
But doesn't this give us the flexibility to where, like on a campus, that's another level of important, naming of something versus a weight room or
Yeah.
transportation. This gives us the flexibility to bypass some of that for some of the smaller things, right?
Absolutely.
What we would like to do is say that we would like to have it in policy that if we're naming a new campus, whether it's a brand new construction or whether it's repurposing, like BMS, you gave 3 great examples where y'all did name those. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think that the board took action on BMS. I think the decision was just made that it was gonna become Belton Middle School. Under this policy, that would have needed to go through, and it's a new campus, and likely we would have ended up in that end result anyway, because it makes sense. But under this policy, the board would have brought a recommendation for BMS, and then y'all would have voted. Take
and is that
action.
gonna be a standing committee? Is it gonna be, how are you gonna form it, I guess?
Made from stakeholders from that. So with the way we envision, I think the way it's written on here is, the facilities committee, the purpose of making recommendations, it shall consist of 12 to 20 members who are residents of the geographic area served by the district. Membership shall consist of a diverse group of leaders, educators, parents, and others who have made an interest in the process. It may or may not contain board members at the discretion of the facilities committee. So kind of what I envision, and we've envisioned on that is that this committee is gonna kind of set the parameters of who's gonna be on that. And we can work through that same process like we do any other focus groups or guide groups. But if it's a elementary school, then we need to have it set up where we can have representatives of that attendance boundary that live in those neighborhoods be on that committee. If it's for a high school, then we need to have stakeholders that are gonna be in those attendance zones of that high school involved in that committee. If it's for a district facility, like our fine arts complex or a stadium or something like that, then we need to have representatives that represent the entire district in that. So kind of that is, this committee will have control of the size of that committee, who chairs that committee, and what groups we include on that committee. And I envision a process where we have administrators, campus administrators, and communications kind of help guide through that process, but we take input from you guys on who needs to be on that committee. And most importantly, it's designated in here that the chairman of the board facilities committee will appoint the chairman of the school name selection committee. So y'all have a lot of control over who's on that committee, but they are gonna be the tool that gathers data or gathers input to bring back to y'all with recommendations for the thing.
Okay, thank you.
The recommendation process, so there's kind of two things here. So if it's renaming an existing facility, if there's evidence, so this kind of goes back to the thing earlier. So as we look at this nomination and determine if further consideration is warranted, I like the way this is written in one district's policy. So if there's evidence of adequate support from the public for a specific name, or in the absence of credible opposition to the name, the board facilities committee, or if named, the school name selection committee may submit the nomination to the board for its consideration. If public support is not evident during the nomination discussion, the board facilities committee may choose to consider an alternate nomination or take no action on the nomination moving forward. So you could also have a scenario where initially we present this, we think, okay, let's move forward, let's gather more stakeholder input on this, and once we gather stakeholder input, it may be we choose not to rename this facility, or we choose to even provide an alternate nomination to rename this facility.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of where some of the ownership from this committee and our administrative team comes in, and we would never just want to put anyone in a position where anyone would get embarrassed or something like that. And then naming a new campus, so if it's a new campus, whether it's an existing facility or a new construction, then we will have a school name selection committee. No more than 3 nominations. We really want them to take stakeholder input, have this discussions, vet it all out, and bring no more than 3 nominations to the board. and then the board will make the decision. So one thing we put in here too, decision-making consensus is defined as the apparent preference after each committee member has had an opportunity to participate in the discussion. And I think this is important. Appropriate processes for gathering consensus will be established. So once that committee's established, we will help guide through a process of what do we need to do to get the proper stakeholder input so that we can narrow this down to some suitable nominations. So whether that be surveys and thought exchanges and campus interviews and student focus groups and community focus groups, whatever all that process may entail, I think it may look a little different time to time based on the tools available and the scope of the project too. We talked about selection committee, and so the new facility naming schedule. We talked with some architects, kind of looked at some other districts, and there seems to be some industry standards. So if you're going to do it, and we put it's recommended, we didn't put we shall or will. So it's recommended generally for a high school to have a name about 12 months out to opening. That gives you plenty of time to do your branding, all of your graphics, uniforms, fine arts equipment, all those sorts of things. Middle school is recommended to name about 9 months prior to opening, and for an elementary school about 6 months prior to opening. So obviously we can stretch that out. I don't know that when we get to that point that we would want to get inside of those, just because it makes some of the ordering of, especially color specific and brand specific stuff, a little bit tougher. And then I think this is obviously very important, that the board will have final approval on the naming or renaming of any or of new or existing district-owned facilities. So regardless of a nomination, regardless of a recommendation of the facilities committee or a school naming committee, the board takes final action on naming of any and all facilities. Dedication plaques and ceremonies, that's just saying we will have one, and it kind of outlines that process. One thing about mascots and school colors, we feel like that, the superintendent needs to determine that process. They will seek appropriate stakeholder input and consultation with the board, but we would like for the final decision, is selected mascots to reside with the superintendent or designee. So that kind of takes that off of an action item issue, community input, board input, but ultimately, just the superintendent would own that process and come up with a final determination. So, for colors and mascots.
So, I don't know if I like that or not. Because as hard as that process was, the fact that it had to come back to the board, I think
Helped out.
something that was probably gonna happen from happening. So I like the process the way we had it with the mascot in the new high school.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying we don't trust the superintendent, but I thought that was the better way to get more input and to have that 4-3 vote. I thought that was important to have that as the structure of, because that ended up being still, in my 4 years, that was still the most contentious thing that I've been through. And that was my first year being on the board.
I heard a little bit about that.
Oh my gosh, it just choked us to the wolves on that deal. But I like it better the way it was done from a safeguard standpoint, personally.
You mean protecting the super?
Yes, and protecting the process.
Yep.
Because the superintendent could be put in a bad spot there.
Yes, and at that time, I think that was potentially gonna happen.
Yeah.
And I think the way it ended up going down, albeit very difficult, I thought it protected all of us in the end, because it took 4
Yeah.
to get to that, to make
You
the
know,
final
I
decision.
think you're right on that one, because looking back on it, and put Matt in the situation, let's say, and it's rare, but let's say we're sitting there with a 4-3, now the superintendent's got, I hate to say it, so 4 of your board members you're gonna please, and 3 of them,
You're not, yeah.
they're gonna be mad
Yeah,
at you.
you're right.
I think you're right. I think it did protect the last superintendent from having to make a decision that would have been very rough.
And this is why we wanted to have this conversation, because Mike and I talked about it, and we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, that protects the board, but you're absolutely right.
No, we're here to
Now that you're
protect-
talking, I think
Well, and now that I think about it, this was discussed, so there's not a board member that's on policy committee that went through that. They came in after, so they don't
No,
remember the situation
Janet
where
was there.
we had,
Janet, She's new on policy.
She wasn't in this meeting though.
Right.
Not when they haven't sat
Not when they were drafting.
They don't know the situation a superintendent can be put into,
That's right.
that, you know, Jeff's like, you better do this, and 6 others are like,
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
It was a deal.
I don't know, I got really excited about having the Sun Devils around here. I mean,
really? I need to mark that
I
out.
just, like I said, as hard as that was, and as uncomfortable as that process was, and all the things that were going on behind the scenes, I felt like needing the four to make that happen was best for everybody concerned.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the same consideration would be given to colors as well?
That was just as contentious. It was.
And that is, the board should take those arrows.
I think so. I mean, that's why we get paid the big bucks.
That's right.
All right, so any other feedback just on the policy portion of it? And what we'd like to do is just take a couple scenarios and just walk through them and just see if it kind of holds up and makes sense with how the flow of the process would
And I
go.
think the real key thing is, from a board member lens, is this the way you want the facilities committee to function in the middle of this? And that's why we're bringing it to you today, is the facilities committee could play a real key role in the naming of these facilities, obviously, in if walking through these scenarios, is this the way you would like that to play out? So, and then our goal is to take this, whatever feedback you have today, to the next policy committee meeting, redo some things with them, and then bring it to the whole board for a second reading after that, so.
Well, it seems to me that when we've been through these processes before, we didn't have a facilities
Right.
committee. It wasn't even an option. It
Right.
just filtered through the admin and it made its way finally up to us.
Mhm.
There's no, I mean, if we're gonna deal in the minutia of bringing facility recommendations to the board, then I think the naming of it needs to come through us as well. I
Yeah.
think that just goes hand in hand.
But this is not, there's nothing in here that I read that would hand tie the board, and what I mean by that is, when we renamed mascots at each of the elementary schools, you know, the board had final approval, actually, I think the super did, if I'm not mistaken.
I didn't-
But that was allowed to be voted on by the students at that campus.
That's right.
Now, the principal was the first line of strike, like, you know, no, we're not gonna be Pokemon, we're not doing that. But, I mean, because I would never want to be in a situation where we take the kids out of that situation
Yeah.
and completely, you know, have board that, well, we're naming it this, we don't care what the kids want, we don't, you know, I think that it's important that they are involved in that kind of
And I
situation.
think the flexibility that Mike's talking about is the 12 to 20, us being able to determine the size, who's on the committee, who chairs it. Because each naming, I think, is gonna take on a life of its own, depending on the facility, the size of it, the scope of it.
What it
So I
is,
think the
yeah.
way this has been written, it gives us the flexibility, and we always wanna let the students be involved, if it's a student-centered
Yeah,
decision.
yeah.
I think so.
Well, we could easily come back with maybe some type of a scenario where, with mascots and colors, where the superintendent determines the process, just seek appropriate input. And then basically the final decision would rest with the board at the recommendation of the superintendent of the designee. So, I mean, you can see a process where, like, for instance, with the elementary mascots, each campus went through a process,
Mhm.
and it ended up with a student election. They brought nominations forward, the students voted, and so then the superintendent or designee would bring that, and then we could even say, could bring that to the board and say, this is the process we went through, this is the input we saw, this is the results that came back, and these are the recommendations we're making to rename, you know, these elementary mascots. So hopefully, you know, we won't be going through that process again, where we're naming, you know, 11 campuses at once on mascots, but,
I
you know,
remember-
it happens.
I remember right after the bond passed, I remember behind the scenes, that was another one of those hidden
Yeah.
things that we knew was coming. And because of the redrawing of the lines and everything, and then the true feeders and the funnels, at least at the time, we knew that was something that needed to happen. Now, I know there was a faction of our community that was, oh no, we're tigers, that's it. But it made sense, and I'm gonna tell you, I love the process that we went through, and it was so much fun to listen to the teachers, the parents, out following on social media, as much not fun that is most days, being on social media, but I thought that process went well. So I think now that we've got a facilities committee, we have a policy in place, whether it goes through the superintendent, which ultimately it was Dr. Concanon at that time,
Yeah.
whether it goes through that or it goes through the committee versus the board, that's just the end result. Because if we go through the vetting process and it gets guided like it did with those elementaries to where you're really getting a quality name that everybody chose, we're gonna rubber stamp that.
Right.
So whoever ends up at the very last on that kind of a thing, I think either way, this is a good way to look at it.
That's why I like the way that the policies that we looked at, where it talks about seeking appropriate stakeholder input, really it's kind of flexible enough that as technology changes and circumstances changes, you wouldn't want to say it has to be a community group of at least so many people or whatever, because you've got like COVID and you've got these other tools like Thought Exchange and Google Forms and all this stuff that's kind of come about. Remember, our old policy was written in 1983, so anything that would have been a stakeholder input process in 1983 would look very different now. So when we say just the superintendent can determine the process to seek appropriate stakeholder input, I think that's flexible enough the process can evolve as our needs evolve, but ultimately, we go through this process, it's fun, we get lots of input, and we end up with something that comes to the board.
And it almost seemed, Jeff, if you remember, after we got finished with the turmoil of naming the high school and the mascot and the colors, then when it came to Charter Oak, we were just all kind of like, okay.
Yeah, that was, Janet led the charter oak
Yes,
discussion.
so, but it made sense.
Yeah.
So, again, I think this policy gives us the flexibility to where when it's really at the tip of the sword, we've got it handled.
Yeah.
But if it's not as big of a deal, it's also handled in policy. So I like the flexibility that we have.
Okay. So let's talk about this one, and I'm going to give a real life example. So let's say that at Belton High School, Ty, you get approached, and a community member would like to, their favorite author is William Shakespeare. So they would like to rename the library the William Shakespeare Library at Belton High School. So they would, you kind of walk through the process. That person could come to you and you'd say, hey, that's great. That sounds like sounds very interesting. We've got a process. You need to get a hold of whomever, this person might be Elizabeth Cox, and she'll kind of guide you through the nomination process. So at that point in time, this individual would come, whether we email it to them, whether it's a downloadable form, whatever that process ends up looking like. They would fill out the nomination form. We would be aware of it, and then you would probably get an email or a call, say, hey, we've had a nomination dropped off to us, a community member wants to rename the library the William Shakespeare Library at Belton High School. And so at that point, a discussion would take place. And y'all kind of guide me through this and how y'all envision this happening as well. So at that point, a discussion would take place amongst administrators and members of the facilities committee, and we would kind of talk about is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? Do we see any problems? Is there going to be public support for this? Is there a scenario here where it doesn't meet our criteria established in policy? And so at that point, a decision is going to be made whether or not to move forward with consideration of this nomination or not. If we chose not to, if we said, well, William Shakespeare didn't really contribute to our community, he's a famous author, lots of people enjoyed his work, but, we don't really want to name our facilities over historical figures that have no tie to Belton. At that point, then the decision would be made before it ever came onto an agenda item on a facilities committee that we're not going to pursue this nomination. We just don't feel like it kind of fits what our goals are and what our intent is. So does everybody feel pretty good about that so far?
And like I said before, I think I touched on this earlier in the discussion, I think the number one criteria to vet this from the start is what was their impact in BISD? And Shakespeare made my freshman English experience awful, so I would vote for the
big impact.
Yeah, now, I know you're all about that, but I'm saying, I think the number one criteria that has to be vetted first is what was their impact on BISD personally?
Yeah.
Not that they were a historical figure that did great things for our country somewhere else, but what did they do for us in Belton ISD?
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think the second one on that would be, in your example, it's gonna come into, never end up as an agenda item, the nomination just dies because there's no support.
Right.
And it also could be that there's no support, because we're not naming every locker, we're not naming every
Right, that's
school stage. I mean, at
Right.
some point, it's like, guys, this is,
That's right.
nothing against the library, but, I mean, now, if we had a librarian who served in that library for 50 years, okay, you could look at that and say, this makes sense, but we're not naming every classroom for every, you can't do that.
And being sports guys, I mean, you look at how the NFL does their Hall of Fame. They get 7 in every year, and there's a bunch of good ones that don't make it, because in their position group, they're just not there yet. So then if they don't make it in a certain number of times, they just get dropped off the list. Well, look at how basketball does it. Well, if you dribble the basketball, and you were on a team that won the championship, and you were the 8th man on the team, you may make the Hall of Fame in basketball. Well, it's different. I don't want this to be that way. I want this to be somebody who had a big impact in our district.
Yeah,
That, to me, is what I envision this as the
It's
purpose.
something rare.
yeah.
Yes.
So in this case, we brought this idea of William Shakespeare Library, we discussed it. We don't think there's enough support there, it doesn't really fit what we're trying to accomplish, so it would fall at that point, and we would move forward with it. We would choose not to. Now, what if we had an old English teacher, a retired English teacher, that came back to us, and she said, the best student I ever had was Ty Taggart. He was the best English student I ever had, and you went on to a great, she inspired you, you became this great writer that graduated from Belton High School, Newberry and Pulitzer Prize winner and all those things. And then they came back and said, we would like to name the library the Ty Taggart Library. Well, then that conversation is completely different from.
Well, I mean, look at Blackie Sherrod.
So-
He's on our wall of honor, but look what he accomplished as a sports writer in the state
Right,
of Texas.
right.
He's a legend.
Yeah,
So if that criteria came to us, he didn't have anything to do, once he graduated with Belton ISD, but he went on to accomplish great things.
Famous alumni.
That is
Right.
definitely something to consider.
so at that point, then, if we said, hey, we're interested in this person is a Belton grad, he's made a positive contribution to society, this doesn't sound like a bad idea. So at that point, we've decided we want to move forward in this process. So then, in consultation with the administration, with the superintendent, the facilities committee would decide, is this something that we would go ahead and take to the board and make a case for action? Or would we need to create a school nominating committee? And in this case, I would think you probably would not need a nominating committee, since it's a singular nomination, it's for a specific purpose in a specific part of a building. So you would go ahead and then at that point, the facilities committee would make the recommendation that this be taken to the board as an action item, that we rename the library at Belton High School the Ty Taggart Library, because of the fact that he's a Belton grad, and because of the positive contributions he's made, and represented Belton so well.
I think so.
And then the board would take a recommendation would come from the facilities committee, the board would open it up for discussion, and then they would take a vote on whether to rename the library.
So it really gives the facilities committee a pretty big say in all of this, right? If you think a name is really worthy to consider renaming a facility, we're gonna rely on the facilities committee to push that up to the board to make that decision, because ultimately it's the whole board's decision to make.
Or let it die in the facilities committee. And
Correct.
And after we're gone from this facilities thing, because I'm set in my ways, is I think this ought to be an ultimate honor to have something named after somebody.
Mhm.
I think maybe we could put it in policy and put a couple of criteria in there that we're not straying off of this
Right.
to keep it in line. We're gonna create something here with this go-around in 2021, well, in 2031, we're all, a lot of people's faces are gonna be a lot different around
Yeah.
here. Maybe we could put a couple things in policy about some of the criteria,
Yeah.
more concrete.
And I like your initial clarification there about they have to have made a significant contribution to Belton ISD, or be a Belton ISD alumni and made a significant contribution to the world, right?
Correct.
And I think we can explore putting those more specifically in there.
I would never want to limit it to, let's just say there was a person that did not graduate from here,
Yeah.
never worked for the school, but maybe when they were 26 years old, they moved here, and for the next 40 years, they scholarship kids, they were always volunteering, they were the president of the booster. I mean, they had a 40-year relationship with BISD, but never went here, never worked here. But when you think about Belton, you think about that person. So that would be that. So I think we want to make it where it is a positive contribution to Belton ISD. Like you
I
said.
don't
That's
think
the
being
entire
an alumni
Yeah,
Look at Joe Purtle, he graduated from Idaho High School.
right.
Right.
Well, he is Mr. Belton ISD in my opinion.
Yeah.
So he came along, you know, what is it Chris Flohr always says, got here as quick as he could?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have an easy one now. So we have a bond in November of 2024, and we're gonna open up a new elementary school in the fall of 2026. And so at that point, by policy, since it's a new campus, the facilities committee would sanction a facilities naming committee, set the parameters, decide who the chairperson's gonna be, determine if board members are gonna serve on the committee, and then that committee at the guidance of the superintendent would move forward in collecting stakeholder input, going through a process, coming to a consensus, and then bringing no more than 3 nominations back to the board for consideration and action. They don't have to bring 3, but we don't wanna bring them more than 3.
No.
So,
No,
is everybody okay with that process?
I think giving the board members the option to be on the committee, because I think when we named Charter Oak, because geographically speaking, it wasn't a hot area,
Mhm.
you know, so the tree, the charter, you know, the Charter Oak tree and some of that made sense geographically, but I think there are some places in our school district that are gonna be more of a hot button item because geographically where they are. So I think sometimes board members will be, I'm good, and then there'll be other times where board members are like, hey, I wanna sit on that committee.
Right.
I like to give them
Meaning
the
I want
option.
to hear it.
I like that.
Well, and I can think of one more too. So we've kind of got a singular facility of a library. We've got a brand new school that's passed on bond, that's gonna be built from the ground up. And then the last option, or the last one I was gonna give you is something like let's just say that regardless of how it got to this point, whether it was a remodel of one facility or a brand new facility, a district stadium would probably, it's not a new campus, so by policy, it wouldn't automatically go to a selection committee. So if we knew that we were gonna either rename or build a new a district stadium, then we would come to you guys, the facilities committee, and say, this is a big decision. How do we wanna go about this process? And then y'all would have the latitude to either name a committee that would go through the process, bring in the input, and bring recommendations to you guys, or nominations could be sought and taken to the board. So I think that this gives y'all the flexibility that on a big decision that may have lots of different community opinions on how that process should go, not on the creation of it, but on the naming of it, then you would have the authority to convene a naming committee for that facility and go through the same process like you would with a new campus.
Yeah, now, that's one of those tip of the sword
Right.
items that's gonna be a hot button item. But something else too, our athletic directors mentioned a couple times, if that ever does come to pass with another opportunity to do a stadium for the district, there's also naming rights that could be brought in, like if Dr. Pepper wanted to have a Dr. Pepper Stadium, rather than naming it after a person. Now, in y'all's cases, have y'all seen like, Keith Zilke Stadium at Dr. Pepper Field or something where you can do both?
Well, sometimes they do the field and then they name the stadium, so they'll name the field specific after a person and name the stadium. You got Planet Ford Stadium in Spring, Prosper Stadium is named after a hospital for naming rights, but they named the field separately.
Yeah.
So it still comes
Like Joe Camille Field at Texas was
Yeah.
forever.
Right, yeah, like,
Nobody knew it, yeah.
Yeah.
like Temple Wildcat Stadium, it's Bob McQueen Field, but it's still Temple Wildcat.
Okay, but that would still leave the options, say McLean's or someone
Okay.
could have that and have the naming rights, which could help us financially.
Absolutely.
Right.
So we need to keep that flexibility.
Well, and I think that's why it's important that we keep 3C in here too, under criteria, because that's where we say it may include a financial donation to
Right.
the district. So that way, if we did choose to go that route and go the commercial route, it's in policy that we have the authority to name a facility after someone who
Right.
makes a financial donation.
Yeah.
So-
Be no different there than if some local family donated 25 acres to build an elementary school, it'd kind of be like, well, you probably
Yeah.
need to really consider naming that after.
Yeah, and like Texas, the Red McComb School of Business,
Right.
well, he wrote a $50 million check. They better name something after there. I think those are opportunities that need to be,
Look at
yeah.
So the recommendation I'm getting is for us to go back and work on the mascot school colors, and to do, the primary reason to do that is to protect the superintendent and the administration and let the board be, like you said, at the tip of the sword.
No, I just think I just think that as heated as that got and as nasty as that got in the end, that it would have been unfair to Matt to leave him out to dry to make that decision, where we are elected officials, and if people don't like us, they can get rid of us. But I think in some ways, we're supposed to buffer for him,
Yeah.
and I think that's a way to do that.
And it keeps him from having to make 3 board members mad and 4 of them
That's
happy
true.
with him. It's like, well,
That would be an interesting one, I'm glad y'all.
that evaluation is coming up.
That's right.
It's, those scars are still kind of deep. That was an interesting situation to be thrown into.
I wanna thank Mike, this is, it's important, as we think of the demographic report and the buildings that are gonna go up, and we talk about the facilities assessment and the investment that we're gonna have to make in facilities and future, like, it's a pretty important topic, I think, and hopefully a good policy can keep us all on the same page and keep the process very transparent to the public. So I'm excited, and thanks to Mike for his leadership on it.
Absolutely, appreciate your hard work on that, Mike. Anything else? All right, we'll move on to an update on our current projects.
Okay, and I included just a one-pager spreadsheet to everyone. This was a direct follow-up on the projects that we discussed back in November, and the things that we would kind of, the conclusion of that capital projects list that's been around for the last 5 or 6 years, and the items that we decided to move forward with now, and then the ones that we tabled until we get the results of our facilities assessment back. So, just to kind of give you an update, the swim center outer membrane, that one is under contract. It is an active project. The company has been down, they're taking measurements. They are kind of mobilizing their equipment and putting together the materials that are gonna be needed to make that happen. They'll be here in mid-February, and their estimated completion date is March 20th. That's when they're hoping to be out of here. So the greatest thing about that project is that we're not gonna have to shut the facility down while they're doing it. So most of the work will be done on the exterior, and we'll still be able to have our lessons and Sunrise Swim and Swim Club and our high school, middle school programs all still going at the same time.
And all the pumps and all that stuff we did, everything's been working good. We're back in good order on all that.
Has been our biggest, and I could let Sam speak to this if when we get to that point. Our biggest issue after this membrane's on is just gonna be space. We have lots of people that use that facility, and it gets really crowded at certain times of the day. But we're equipment-wise, we're in a good spot, and we're gonna be in a good spot with the new roof, with the new outer membrane. There is, I put a double asterisk by cost. The cost amount hasn't changed from what was in the RFP and what was presented to the board. There is a $10,000 contingency for potential of an insulation replacement. We do know, the whole reason we're putting a new roof on is because we know some water's gotten in between those membranes, and we do anticipate that some of the insulation's gonna have to be replaced. So, without them actually being in and seeing it firsthand, they just built in a contingency of $10,000, up to $10,000 for insulation replacements. So, the tennis court expansion and the softball and tennis sidewalk and drainage. After consulting with,
That's at Belton High School.
this is all at Belton High School. And so after consulting with our architect, or the architect that's gonna work this project for us, we've decided that probably in the interest of cost and time, since the proximity of these two projects is only, less than 100 feet away from each other, is to go ahead and combine it down to one project. That way we can do it on, we'll only have to go through the process of approving vendors or approving contractor once. Kind of the goal on that is right now we've commissioned surveys and soil samples to be taken. Once those results are back, the architects are gonna kind of work through the project with our team. We're hoping to bring it to a May board meeting for approval with a recommended vendor, with a recommended contractor for start construction in early June and be finished by late summer. Hoping for a late July finish, but with however weather and things like that go, for sure by the time school starts, we feel like we'd be in that facility. So it's just to refresh, that would be adding tennis courts 9 and 10 with fencing and lights. It would be resurfacing all 10 tennis courts because 1 through 8, we've been holding off on that for about 3 years now, kind of waiting to see what 9 and 10 may look like. Looking into LED lighting for all 10 courts, And then, we have put up a 30 by 30, canopy over there. Let's go ahead and put a slab and sidewalk under that canopy.
And is that the only canopy we're bringing, one, or is there another one?
For
still
now, just
available?
one. We put one in each tennis facility, one at Lake Belton, one at Belton
Oh,
High,
okay.
so.
Okay.
And, that's gonna be kind of a place for teams to camp during tournaments. It'll serve as a pavilion for giving out awards at the end of the tournament, things like that as well. It's 900 square feet, so it's quite a large canopy. We get a lot of people under it. The Lake Belton baseball and softball bleacher expansion, that's also in the design phase. We met with, Bartlett Cock and, O'Connell Robertson today. They are in the process of finishing up the plans for that. The biggest challenge on that project is going to be, just getting sturdy steel on the books, and they're anywhere from a 90 to 150 day turnover right now, so it could be up to 5 months, before those are installed. So we don't want to disrupt the seasons of what's already gonna be a tough situation capacity wise because of the COVID restrictions. So we've kind of just talked with our contractor and our builder that we'd like to have everything in place and mobilized, and when the season's over, come in and do that work so that we'll be ready to go.
Now, I just want to be clear, at the beginning of this, we thought that we might be able to get those in for the spring.
Yeah.
We're not. And so we're doing our best, but just the access to steel and all of this is the big issue for us. So
Right.
we apologize for that, but we worked hard to try and make that happen for the spring, but it's just not gonna come to fruition.
Yeah. And then, obviously, when we were talking about this several months ago, we had no clue we were still gonna be dealing with the pandemic like we are, and the resurgence that it has had, so we're still gonna be at 50%. So it's basically gonna be mom and dad, or whoever they live
Well, we looked at some other options about, where could we disperse fans down along the fence lines and things like that. So I know Jill and Sam and who else has worked with you guys on that?
And we've already
And
come
Ty.
up with a good
Yeah.
determination, so we got a good plan for more than Belton ISD, like Belton, more than just their parents to attend the games to see their kids play.
The BIC facilities assessment, and I want to go ahead and introduce you guys. Tracy Richter is here tonight. He's our project manager, and we're going to Melinda and I are going to kind of take you through kind of what our status is, what we've done so far, what the next steps are, and just fill you guys on a little bit more about our facilities assessment, how that process is going to work. But we're so glad Tracy's here tonight, and he'll be able to answer some questions for us too if we have those things coming up. And then the 1920 capital project improvement list, we are in the process of finishing up the carryovers. And I know David brought an updated spreadsheet for us on that tonight, and so you can kind of see the status of the projects in red have been completed, the projects the projects that are currently underway, and then the projects which were scheduled, and then the ones that will be in the summer of 2021. So we fully anticipate, before school starts in August, that we will have basically that project wrapped up. And we know we've been very proud of how that process has worked. A whole lot of work has gotten done in a fairly short amount of time, and the thing I'm most proud of, and I came in towards the middle of this project, but is that our entire district was impacted by this. It wasn't just one school or one program. It was district wide. Students have directly been impacted by this, but we've also done things to make our campuses safer. We've done things to make our departments work better. I think as I look through that list, the one probably that sticks out to me the most is the security vestibule at Belton High School that's been needed for quite some time. So that's going to be one of the bigger projects just because of the scope of work involved. But it's definitely going to make entry into Belton High School a lot safer than what we currently have. And I did put the last three. We're really excited about this. We're down to 3 items at Lake Belton High School other than the bleacher expansion. So the PAC and black box lighting, that lighting has been installed. That lighting has been programmed. And we've got a group coming back on the 28th to train our staff on how to run the lighting. So that's in the PAC and Black Box Theater. So prior to when play season, we will have everything up and running. We're excited about that. It was minor. It wasn't a large scale of work, but there was some cabinetry in the administrative portion of the building and some of the counters in the commons area that did not pass ADA inspection. And so whenever that millwork was ordered about 8 weeks ago, it was prefabbed off-site. The crew is actually in Belton today and tomorrow, and that work's should be finished by noon tomorrow. So that work will all be done, everything up to ADA. And then the only thing that's left is there's some ADA compliance on the entries to the baseball dugouts, and we've been working with our architect and our contractor on that, and they're gonna wait until we get the design on the bleachers so they can see if how they may impact, but we'll have that up and running. So that those dugouts are handicap accessible by the time the season starts. So I put ASAP on there. I mean, it may be next week, it may be week after next, but very soon we'll have a little curb and a little ramp for it, and then they're gonna make some portable ones coming out the front of the dugout, so. Any questions on the projects, anything from the spreadsheet that requires further discussion? We're happy with where we're at. Some things are flying around fast. Really pleased with the work our teams are doing and kind of where we're headed on this. To completion, by the end of summer. That was a long list when it started. It was, how many pages was it, David? 7 or 8?
Yeah.
9?
Yeah, it was long. Well, the coolest thing to me was when this thing got put together with Dr. Battershaw and you guys going around the district and putting that list together and putting that $3.5 million in the, being able to approve that. And then when you go to these places, like I was at Miller Heights a couple of weeks ago, and you listen to the principals and you listen to the teachers, and they brag about the things that get done, and then you go across to Southwest Elementary, and you go to Chisholm Trail, and you go around the district, and you see, or you walk in the PAC at Belton High School, all these things that get done. This has been my proudest thing since I've been on the school board so far, has been this list. And if we were ever gonna name anything after somebody, this guy may be on the list. Because Bennett and his guys.
Don't put my name on a plaque.
I brag about him because your name's the name they mention when they're on these.
Well, let me tell you, when this list is complete, they love me now. When we're done with this, they're not gonna love me anymore.
No, you guys have done such a good job, and
I
Mike, I'm
appreciate that.
glad you're at the head of this thing now, so.
That's been fun. It's fun.
Absolutely. All right.
So,
Are we ready?
I'm gonna jump right in.
Yeah, let's go to the next item, facilities assessment update. You have to know that March has seemed like forever away. It has nothing to do with the basketball tournament.
Yeah.
We're ready. We're ready now. Let's go. Let's do it.
Well, I think this will, I'm excited about this project, and I think this will kind of get you guys excited about it too. So this is a true partnership. We took this on as a priority that would help us with our district planning, strategic planning, and everything we're gonna need to do moving forward. And it's kind of the thought process is you don't really know what you need until you know what you have. So we wanted to really go through a process that was neutral in the fact that it gave us data that we can use moving forward to make the decisions that are going to be best for the kids in our district. And so this is a great partnership. Really, HPM is the company that won the contract, and HPM is the company that Tracy works for as our project manager, and they're going to play a big role. But there's also 3 other partners that we have in this as well. So Texas Pro is the company that's handling all of our roof assessments, and we're going to show you a couple of examples and kind of tell you how that process has worked. EMA is the company that's doing our mechanical, electrical, and plumbing conditions assessment, and we'll kind of go through a few points about exactly what's going to be entailed in that. HPM is going to help us with our functional capacity, our reporting tool, which is going to be really cool. I mean, there's going to be several components, but there's going to be a dashboard where you can go in and just immediately get immediate input back. If you need to know about the air conditioning units at Chisholm Trail, then you'll be able to zero in on one unit through that dashboard, and it'll tell you what year it was made, what the serial number is, what the manufacturer is, and be able to get parts lists and all those sorts of things. And then we have Into Architectural Associates, and that's a group that Melinda and Deanna have been working with, that's going to kind of help us with our architectural assessment, our educational standards development, and educational suitability assessment, and we'll kind of talk through what that means as well. So this is the deliverables that we're gonna have. So when this process is over, we will have a facility conditions assessment. We'll have educational standards, meaning does the building and the room and the school serve the purpose that it's intended to serve based on what we've said is our standards, Belton ISD. The educational suitability assessment, functional capacity. Functional capacity is very important to us because right now we're basically operating off of an architectural capacity. And sometimes what the building was designed for and what that number is may not be what it's used for. An architectural capacity does not take into account a classroom that have been designed to hold 25 fifth graders, but it's actually only holding 3 FA kids right now. So that, we want to see how do our programs and how we're using our buildings affect the capacity, and what's our true capacity, what's our functional capacity of the different campuses.
And we saw that at Chisholm Trail a couple of weeks ago, because they're so jammed full, there's kids in classrooms that are old music rooms that are doing something different, and kids are in science labs that aren't doing science anymore, so I see what you're saying.
Yeah. That's exactly it.
A state of the schools report, which you'll see some examples in general terms of what that's gonna kind of look like, and then an interactive dashboard that's really gonna be kind of the main source where we can go get this data back. So, the update on the facilities condition. So the first thing we did is we met with the team, and we kind of talked about each facility in the district. We had Phil Wessels and Mike Camden and some of our facilities guys that know these facilities inside and out. And we just started talking about it. These are some of the things you'll see. These are some of the areas where we have problems. These are some of the systems that are great. These are some of the ones that have been replaced. And we kind of did that campus by campus and went through with that team, with EMA on all these different facilities and all the different MEP systems that are there. And so then we'll provide a report for facility and identify system types and current conditions. And then we're gonna, at the end of it, we'll kind of get a task list of things that future needs and deficiencies with a cost estimate for replacement. So where we think that's gonna be helpful, it's not a to-do list that we gotta get all these things done, but it's kind of when we build out budgets and start talking about replacement cycles, and this is when we anticipate these units will go out and those types of things, that task list is gonna be really important for us to help to create short-term, medium, and long-term plans as far as our MEP systems are concerned.
Sometimes these take them as their big pictures.
So this is some examples of the current facilities assessment. So current progress, all of our campuses have been walked, and the team, as the EMA team goes around, they take photos, they take notes, they take all of the technology, plumbing systems, the mechanical systems, and they put it all on floor plans where all this equipment is located, and they basically do a conditions assessment of each component of those systems.
So with that tree out front, is that Miller Heights on the bottom? That lone pine tree out front? Is that on the roof of Miller Heights?
Might be.
I think it is.
Yep. You're right, the lone pine tree.
And so some of the things that they've noticed so far is that with all of our facilities, we've heard this from all 4 groups that have been on our campuses, is that how well maintained and how clean our facilities are. And that really makes us feel proud to hear that our facility staff, our ground staff, our custodial staff, that everybody's doing a good job maintaining from the newest buildings to the oldest buildings, and they've been impressed at how well maintained everything is. So, part of the conditions they're seeing is that the equipment is conditioned. A lot of times it's consistent with the building ages. So an older building, they're seeing some older equipment. A newer building, we have everything in this district from clay. We still have clay plumbing, in some of the buildings and things as well. So they're seeing conditions that are consistent with the building ages. They are seeing that some of our older buildings do have dated building automation systems, HVAC control, some of those types of things. And moving forward, as you create long-range plans, there could be some planning to standardize our MEP systems. And then the next steps, that they still have to do our maintenance of facilities, buildings, support services. They're still working on equipment lists and floor plans. They'll go back and re-walk schools where they need additional information or clarity, and then they're gonna start organizing the information to be put on the dashboard. And then, so the roof assessments, the roofing assessment is done completely separate from the facilities conditions assessment. But you can kind of see here, and I won't read through each bullet point, but what they do is this crew comes in and they basically are gonna be able to tell us, I mean, roofs are big ticket items when you talk about replacements, repair, upkeep. And so we're gonna get a very true, picture of the current conditions of our roofs, what current things look like they need repair, and then be able to build out what replacement schedules should look like, and recommendations on when we do get ready to replace roofs, what types of roofs we might want to look at in terms of energy efficiency, wear and tear, longevity, lifespan, those types of things. You can see here's Belton High, that's a lot of roof at Belton High School. So far, his team has come in, they've done 19 campuses have been inspected. They do drone footage of every campus, and there was a couple that are too close to the airport that they couldn't get their drones up. So they just have rooftop pictures of those. But the other 17 campuses, I think 16, all have drone footage. They document the deficiencies, they show us where some problem spots may lie. They kind of outline what the estimated cost would be for routine maintenance and repairs. They're gonna give us a square footage of each roof, which is gonna be very, very handy to have when figuring out future costs. And then they give us an estimated cost and life expectancy for the roofs on all of our facilities. So we should have an idea of what our 20-year, 30-year products are and which ones are gonna need to be attended to sooner than later.
Mike, haven't we in the last 2 or 3 years, and Dave, you might know this, didn't we do Belton High School in phases, aren't we?
Yeah, so all the light color has all been replaced, the
Yeah.
dark is not.
Okay, and then Sparta, we got a roof problem over there, I think. Yeah,
It's actually on the whole roof.
yeah,
The part was not replaced.
really?
Yeah, so we've been working on that
Yep.
in between the rain showers.
And the assessment's sectioned off like that, so he's not gonna give you a whole roof replacement. He does it by section, so
Yeah.
you know that there are different times when you replace or repair.
Oh, good.
So it's very detailed.
Yeah, because like at Belton High School, it's been added on to so
That's
many times.
exactly right.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
different age roofs on there, yeah.
That's true.
Well, and from a cost standpoint, on a big roof like that too, you spread it out over time, it becomes a little easier to work into the budget than taking it all on at once. The observations from our roof company is that, obviously, we've got different styles of manufacturers. We've had different installers. I mean, that's gonna be normal with the range of age of buildings we have. Then we will have opportunities for energy savings moving forward if we use certain types of Energy Star rated roofs. Next steps, is they'll help make recommendations basically of life expectancy, where we can look district-wide and kind of see what the life expectancy of all of our roofs are. Help us give us data that will help us create a 5, 10, and 15-year plan. And then they'll give us recommendations for repairs and preventative maintenance that needs to take place.
Okay.
One thing that we love about this is it's a neutral report, so it's not a, you go to get your oil changed and they come back in with 5 other things they'd like for you to do. They're just giving us what their recommendations are, and then we can deal with it. There's gonna be things we're gonna find in this that we'll be able to take care of in-house, quickly. And so that's what we're kind of excited about. There are some talking points on this, and I'm gonna invite Dr. Golden to step in at any point, because she's been involved in some very detailed about our architectural conditions assessment and the other components of that, which is the instructional components and the adequacies. So, we did get input from campuses, some principal questionnaires were distributed, our principals gave some great input back. All facilities have been walked, and when we say they've been walked now, so this is the 3rd group that has had a team in our facility. So EMA has walked every facility, the ProStar has been to every facility, and now Into Architecture has been to every facility as well. So there's 3 different groups that have been through all of our campuses and gathered information to put together for us.
And along with principals, Keith, Sam, and Stephanie through CTE Lens have walked it with her as well, in those facilities.
So they're working on data entry at this point. and a cost database is basically on, we're gonna have a campus cost that, but this is kind of what's inside the school, and what would it cost to replace those items, and to get them up to the standards that other campuses may or may not have, based on what we think our kids need here in Belton. So the educational adequacy study, I'll kind of hit the high points on this one, and then Melinda may can bring in more layman's terms for us. So, like I said, all facilities have been walked, the floor plans have been gathered, and one thing that's important to note is they also did some ADA assessments for us, and they can kind of give us an ADA index on which campuses are in the best spots, ADA compliancy, and which ones are in the weakest spots, ADA compliancy. And then we are going to have, those of you that were involved in the last session of Journey of a Graduate, we mentioned this, is we're going to try to use that team and some others and really try to get some people together to kind of talk about these educational standards a little bit based on our competencies created in the Journey of a Graduate, and that's coming up in February.
Yeah, super excited about that. So Irene with Into Architecture Group has been waiting for our Journey of the Grad competencies, because she is going to take on that next piece on February 3rd. We'll ask members of the design team from Journey of a Grad to join, but we specifically would like, if you're able to, our facilities committee board member representatives to be there as well. It'll be virtual, it'll be via Zoom. But we're going to basically take the competencies in the Journey of a Graduate and start asking questions around what are the behaviors and activities that we would hope to see in classrooms and in our learning environments based on these competencies. So while a lot of this has been a conditions assessment, this is going to be really an assessment through the learning perspective. And once we talk about behaviors and activities we would hope to see to bring those competencies to life, we're then going to ask, then, what are the attributes of the environment that we might need to consider that would enhance our ability and support our ability to bring those competencies to life? And then kind of the third piece is then going to be, of those attributes of the environment, the physical environment, what are the priorities? And what Irene's going to do is then go back into our facilities and assess them and kind of give us some scoring around, if we say, for example, that collaboration is one of the competencies that rose to the top, that we're going to talk about at the board meeting on Monday. Do our spaces support that kind of collaboration? And then go through our facilities and give us some feedback on, of the priorities, how are our facilities faring in terms of supporting that Journey of a Graduate? So I'm super excited about this next step. She's been patiently waiting.
Yeah, and we all know that we had teachers say to us in the past, right? Yeah, I've got a room, and the room is fine, but it's not, the space isn't really laid out for what I need, right? And we've heard those kind of things said before, and this is really about, if we're gonna teach these things and we wanna see these things in the system, does the space provide us, is the space adequate for us to do that, or do we have the facilities to do that? So it helps align what we do in facilities with what we're wanting to see in the instructional world.
And that will extend out of the classroom into extracurriculars, CTE, athletics, all those sorts of things as well. So we'll get an educational adequacy index or rating about, like, our 4 middle schools. How well can we meet the needs of the students based on what our standards are at all 4 of those middle schools? We'll kind of get some feedback on that, on what a third party sees based on the data that they take.
So Melinda, just to clarify, so the ask is for our facilities committee, if you'd like to participate in that Zoom session coming up, it's coming up what date?
It's February 3rd
February
from 6 to 8.
Okay, at 6 p.m. And that's gonna be a big group, right?
It will be. We're going to ask for volunteers from our Journey of a Grad design team, but specifically wanted to invite you because of your leadership and role on the facilities committee.
I'll be there.
So do y'all have questions for us? Anything based on that? I mean, that's a lot we just threw at you, but we wanted to let you know lots of work's been going on, and there's still a lot of work left to go, but we're going to have a really good tool at the end of this that's going to help us plan. And
I'll just have to say that what you just told us, knowing that 3 different professional organizations have all been through the same steps, I didn't know it was gonna be that comprehensive. That's impressive to me. That's gonna mean a lot. I also like the point that you brought out, that these guys don't have any skins in the game, and they're gonna give their estimate and walk out. And then we get to determine, there's no, sometimes architects will look at projects and they've got skin in the game.
Yep.
This is really objective coming from these professionals that are doing this. So I didn't really understand this, how comprehensive it was gonna be. So that makes me even more excited. Because that's gonna increase our chances of making the best right decisions.
I think from a board perspective too, that information is gonna feed us into this strategic planning, right? So then we need to develop a plan to get to the point where we all wanna get in the future. And that plan could include bonds and things like that, and this will give us the right information to know, what does our ask really need to be?
Right.
If we want to achieve these things, how do we get there, what's our ask really need to be? And so we're excited, I think all the things are lining up really well. We appreciate the leadership of everybody in this room, because it's taken a whole group to get there.
Other than the personality things, when we were evaluating our 6 finalists and going through the 2-hour interviews, we knew where we were in a facilities and growth standpoint. And one of the strengths that Matt brought to the table was being in Leander and being in a district that's involved in this with way bigger scales than us. So that leadership, putting all this plan together, bringing Mike on board, I think, man, y'all are hitting it really hard, and we really appreciate it. Because I just think, from our standpoint, spending the money correctly is at the key of what board members should be about.
Right.
Not overspending or underspending in a lot of cases, and this is gonna help us maximize that a lot.
We're excited. Anything else, Mike?
I'm good. Thank you, guys. We want to thank Tracy again for coming and being here, and we're looking forward to rolling this thing through. There's a lot of work that's going to happen in the next couple of months. We're excited about it. So,
We've had to cancel 2 facilities meetings because there wasn't anything to do. My hope for the next 2 years is that we never have to cancel another one, and I think this is gonna solve that. We're gonna have so much to
He's
do.
gonna be like a kid in the candy store when
Oh,
he gets
yeah.
this report, you know that, right?
So and I'll be quiet after this, but as part of the School Board Appreciation Month, I got about 60 emails yesterday from a bunch of kids. And I've started responding to all of them. And some of them are asking questions. It's not just like, thank you, but hey, question. And a bunch of them are like, is your job hard? What are the hardest things? What's the most fun about being on the school board? And all 3 or 4 of them that have asked me so far, what's the funnest part? And I know funnest is bad. Janet would be mad at me if I said that. But what's the most fun about being on the school board? I've responded the same way every time. I love being the chairman of the facilities committee. So that's it. Exclamation point. Boom. So that's what I like. So I appreciate what you guys are all doing. This is a big deal.
Sounds good. Well, we appreciate y'all. Thanks, Mike, for all your work on this one. This was heavy input from Mike Morgan on this one, a lot of burden, but he's done great. So.
Can't think of anybody we'd rather have sitting there.
well, I want to thank our team too. We've got not only our team, but like I said, Melinda, Deanna, David, and all of theirs, and Keith Cook's been helping out a little bit too. And we've got a lot of people that are helping, and the Tracy and his team are the guys that are going to pull it all together for us. We're excited.
Any future concerns, anything?
Nope. Not until we get our report.
Done.
All right.